Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Nirmal. I'm Hiral Dadia. We have with us Kapil, Kaul CEO, CAPA India joining in. Kapil, I think it's overdone to actually talk about as to what's been the impact of COVID-19 on the economies, on different nations. Uh, to come to the point right now with regards to the aviation sector as well, we've seen what has already happened. It's already been around 65, 70 days of lockdown. And taking this number of days into consideration, how big is the suffering for the sector?
Well, first of all, let's accept, I don't want to give adjectives to COVID, but it's important to mention that it was an extreme impact. Sudden but extreme. And it's continuing. I don't see this, I see this lasting for about a few more months, if not more. So for a sector which was very fragile while it entered COVID, strategically and financially, COVID just changed the math completely for most of the sector, for most of the players in the sector. So, so in a sense, the lockdown for them was very easy.
Correct.
Because all you do is just to park your planes and tell the staff to go back home. But resumption is a very difficult challenge. Because first of all, you don't know what the demand is. Whatever you have in the initial period, that has also got compromised because of the confusion between center and states. And secondly, that there may be some more pent-up demand there for another week or so. But then people are not willing to travel right now. Even you would see people not resuming office because of the sensitivity involved. So I think this is a long-drawn battle. And for some of the airlines, it's a very difficult battle to survive.
Right. So, Kapil, already the sector itself was struggling. Since a year, we already heard, we all know what happened with Jet Airways as well, almost a year, 2 months ago. Fare increases was something that we were already looking at. And now, with all of this, any which ways, the domestic carriers, if you go to see, are few. In that, if this has to continue, if there is no support expected to come in, what do you think will be the state of the sector? Do you think you would probably see more bankruptcies getting filed?
I think even before COVID, as I said, they were fragile. It was not a liquidity risk, a solvency risk. And COVID just really impacts that completely, changes the math completely. Whatever hope you had prior to COVID to restructure and reform and get your business in shape, COVID has destroyed that. So it is very difficult to expect that industry will not downsize and downsize significantly unless and until there is a very, very massive recapitalization by some of the airlines, which I don't see coming. They were hoping for a government bailout to be quite substantial, but that's not happened. Now, if they don't bring in equity, if they don't bring in capital, and that's too significant, I can't see some of the airlines surviving. So it's up to them. If they believe that the business merits a very significant recapitalization, and they have the ability and willingness to recapitalize, then I think you may see the industry possibly restructuring to remain relevant and viable. But it may not downsize, or you may not see airline failures. But without any recapitalization by end June, early July, you cannot see some of the airlines surviving. That's not possible.
So do you think with raising funds, recapitalization is going to be challenging, number one? And secondly, with regards to the stimulus package that has been announced by the government of India as well, do you think that's enough? What else do you think is required that the government needs to do to help the aviation sector?
So I think the government has taken a stand that it will not do a sectoral intervention. So that's very clear. I haven't seen a sectoral intervention. Even for tourism, which was really expecting some assistance from the government. The government has looked at some monetary easing and making sure that people who are eligible to raise debt, there is liquidity available. But looking at the balance sheet of some of these airlines, I don't think they qualify to get more debts. There are no assets to monetize.
Hmm.
I think some of the securitization with respect to passenger revenues that are coming in, most of it has been already done. So I'm not sure what is there that they can give us a collateral for the banks to feel confident to lend, unless and until they bring in some significant capital themselves, and the banks could bring in the other part. So that is, but we have not seen any signs of that decision taken by the promoters. I mean, each one of the player who is vulnerable is waiting for the other guy to see who first, or who is more at risk. So I think there's no other way for airlines to recapitalize, because I don't think that they are eligible for funding, and the only source of capital would be promoters, because raising any capital right now is going to take 3 to 6 months minimum. There may be some distressed capital investors available, but that's not going to happen immediately, because nobody knows that what will be the other side once we emerge from the COVID. How much of demand disruptions are going to see? Is it going to be followed by supply side disruptions? So any investor would like to just wait for about 3 to 6 months to see where the sector is heading. So I think that option is also very limited. So it's just back to promoters to see if they believe in the business and recapitalize.
Right. So, according to you, what are your estimates indicating with regards to the air traffic? By how much are you expecting that to fall? And secondly, if that happens, by how much are you expecting the turnovers and revenues of the aviation sector as a whole to shrink if you have to look at FY21 and 22?
Circumstances. But our projections are that the best case scenario is about 50% reduction in domestic,
Okay.
international more, because international is going to be a long haul to revive, especially long haul travel. So the best case we're looking at about 50. The worst case is about 60% reduction in traffic, both for domestic and international, which eventually means that about from 670 odd planes, you would require roughly about 400 to 450, thereby indicating that in the near term, for 6 to 12 months, you may have a surplus of about 200 to 250 aircraft. As for financial, just in the first half, because we are yet to uh, understand what are the resumption approvals that the government is going to give, what percentage of capacity would be allowed for next quarter. But for first quarter, I think the industry is looking at in the range of about $1.5 billion to $1.75 billion of losses. Some of it could be deferred because you can defer some leases, you're not going to pay some salaries. But ballpark, it's going to be 1.5 to about 1.7 billion just for one quarter. Going forward depends upon the resumption that will happen in quarter two. But broadly, I would see that it's going to be a massive impact for 6 months, which is, except Indigo, I don't think there is any other carrier that has the wherewithal to bear this, unless and until, as I said, Air India is financed by Government of India, Vistara and AirAsia financed by Tata's, SpiceJet is funded by its promoter, Goyer is funded by the Dadia Group.
Correct.
If that doesn't happen, it's very difficult to survive this extreme impact.
Right. So do you think, something like this, a catastrophe like this actually calls for an emergence of low-cost airlines that will actually come up, and those could be the ones in a way that, probably could survive?
I think low-cost airlines are better placed for sure. I mean, Indigo is one example. If you take off their restricted cash, they still have about $1.2 billion with them, and they can dip into their restricted cash significantly. So they have roughly about $2 billion to play with. It will be a massive impact for them because 260 planes, $5 billion top line, such a massive cost structure. But they have the wherewithal, at least for what looks to be in FY21, they can manage. As for rest is concerned, that it is extremely difficult to manage without any cash. And as I said, the beginning would be that are you able to fully fund the post-COVID environment, post-COVID business case? And that's going to be lasting for about 2 to 3 years, minimum 2 years. It may begin to normalize from quarter 3. By the time we get back to pre-COVID levels, it's about a couple of years. So you need to have fully funding the business for next 2 years. Without that, I think we will continue to see a very challenging environment for most.
Right. And what happens to the order book, Kapil? Because if I was just reading a report which said I think that there's almost around 500 to 550 aircraft which are on the order book in totality from Indian companies. Do you think they would be in a position to actually take deliveries? That's number one. Or do you think they would be in a better position to negotiate on the rates right now, taking the scenario into consideration?
Well, the order book is much bigger than what you stated. Indigo itself is about 630 odd planes.
Okay.
Spice is a couple of. So totally it will be closer to 1,000 aircraft, 900 to 1,000 aircraft. That's the order book. But the order book is irrelevant right now. If you exclude Indigo, the rest of the 450, 500 order book depends upon if the business survives. So obviously they will have to defer their inductions that were planned for FY21 and 22. And you may see the OEMs who are themselves impacted. There is a massive supply side disruption, supply chain disruptions for the OEMs. Their capacity in production has got impacted. So that's manageable. But that's only manageable if you have a business case for the next few years to survive. So you can go to the OEMs and look for deferment, which is most likely going to happen. But ultimately, whether it is lessors or OEMs, if you have the funding to overcome this crisis, everything else is possible. Yes. So the order books can get deferred for at least a couple of years, and that's a likely thing to happen. Yes.
Right. And right now, when all of us were in a lockdown situation, when there was no there were no flights taking off, what has been the estimated loss if you have to only take into consideration parking charges, or if you have to talk about leasing charges, maintenance charges, because this is something which would have to be incurred. Yeah, probably they would have deferred some of the leasing charges. Probably airports could have, foregone the parking charges as well. But any fixed costs that you're looking at, which probably will have to be paid, and that's something which is going to pinch them?
Well, I think 45% of the cost are fixed.
Okay.
So you have to absorb them. You can defer. You can just have some staff for leave without pay. You can cut salaries. You can defer. You could just basically rationalize some costs. But most of them are going to be absorbed. So the losses that you will see for FY21 will reflect the entire fixed costs that the industry has to bear, even if the fleet is grounded. So the 1.5 to 1.75 billion number that we had estimated at the beginning of April included the impact of the lockdown for 60 days to 75 days, and have about 15 to 20, 15 2 weeks to 3 weeks of resumption at 30%. So 1.5 billion to 1.7 billion losses included the lockdown and the partial resumption, which will be mostly 3 days the fixed cost itself.
Right. And Kapil, overall right now, thinking of that the lockdown is reopening, do you think there is a possibility that, because it's on the 25th of May is when they've resumed at least domestic travel, so in the month, end of May, probably the month of June, there could be some bit of a peak in terms of where air traffic goes?
No, I think the peak is April, May, June. April, May was lost. June we have lost because there was a pent-up demand. But there was a confusion at the state level. We continuously saw advisories being changed, the institutional quarantine decisions being revised regularly. So that impacted the traffic. So 30% plus capacity that was approved was actually 20-25% in actual operations because of this confusion, because some of these flights had to be cancelled. So I think the traffic Q1 is normally a peak. We have lost that. What you have is a Q2, which is the worst period in a physical. So most of the industry, if they get into a 50-60% capacity for Q2, is the worst period of travel. So that's why their risks get significantly elevated, because your majority of your capacity resumption would be in the weakest travel period where yields are significantly compromised. So that is a challenge for the industry. So we are earliest looking at quarter 3 around Diwali, where some bit of normalization may take place.
Right. And Kapil, what's your sense on the employee side? Because a lot of airlines have gone ahead and laid off, employees right now already. Now, okay, if they're on a furlough or something, does not matter. If they've taken salary cuts, does not matter. But if they have to start resuming, and if there is a demand pickup that happens, do you think it is going to be challenging, number one, to get employees back? And number two, will it be a challenge to, I mean, probably you'll get them at a 30 to 40% increase than what you were already paying them. So does the employee cost component actually increase over time for these airlines?
Well, first of all, I think if the industry downsizes, you have a 30% plus risk to staffing. So I don't think people will carry even with leave without pay. The business is going to be downsizing significantly. So a 30% plus workforce will get impacted. And I'm talking about airlines itself. When you look at the ground handling business, for example, which has got impacted because the international operations is almost grounded and it's going to take a while for it to resume. There we are talking about 20,000 people in excess. So I think the impact of COVID will now begin to reflect in terms of job losses and significant job losses. Airports will rationalize their workforce. Ground handling is to do with. Airlines will have to do. And gradually you will see MROs and other industry segments of the industry getting impacted. So unavoidable, frankly.
Right. So Kapil, if you have to look at aviation companies and governments across right now, if you have to compare, which is the government which has given out the best policy, in terms of a stimulus package for the industry, which other countries could actually look at, something which is doable by all?
Well, I think United States is aviation is strategic to them. Unlike India, they write checks directly. There are conditions imposed, but those conditions are with respect to retaining employment. So US given a massive stimulus. And initially the airlines were reluctant because they thought that it may impact control. But I think later on, they all have accepted it. Lufthansa is going to go through a partial renationalization, as we call it, because they have accepted a massive stimulus by the government. Singapore Airlines has given $13 billion stimulus. You have Middle East carriers going to be supporting their airlines completely. There are countries like Australia, UK, who have been very reluctant to put in money into the industry. Like India, they have just said that we will enhance liquidity measures to make sure that if you need funding, the liquidity is available. But they have not done any sectoral intervention. So different governments have a different approach. Now in India, we are not like United States that we could write checks directly to the airline. So the government, in their wisdom, has decided that no sectoral intervention is required because we don't know how deep this problem is. So if you burn your resources upfront, then you'll have nothing to provide to the industry, if at all a sectoral intervention is required. So I think different governments have taken a different perspective, and Indian government's priorities have been different: health, agriculture, medium and small enterprises. I don't think aviation figures anywhere in that list.
Right. And with all of this, Kapil, by how many months or years are we saying that Air India divestment could now be delayed from here on?
No, Air India divestment, surprisingly and rightly so, is on the government's agenda. I think they have extended the RFP till end of August. They may extend it to October or December, so that post-COVID environment for investors is known. But I think the government is very keen to divest Air India. They may give more concessions, but I think it's on their agenda, and I'm happy that COVID has not changed that decision.
Right, but
and there is an investor interest. That might have got muted a bit. There's an investor interest in Air India, provided government is willing to make further concessions, and the post-COVID environment doesn't look a continuing crisis.
Right. But Kapil, do you think even if it's on the agenda, it is going to be an easy task? Because for something like an Air India to happen in terms of divestment, you really need recovery to come in terms of global markets, in terms of global investors. That's where the money is actually in the end going to come from somewhere. Do you think it is going to be a daunting task to actually divest Air India in FY21 according to you?
Tried. I don't see it in FY21 because by the time the RFP second or third extension happens, we may have the calendar year. But in FY22, which is next fiscal, and if the government remains committed to the divestment of Air India, I think within the 12 months post the RFP deadline, which October or December, you may see Air India divested.
Hmm.
And as I said, it is in their interest to make sure that the massive funding that Air India government has to, taxpayers have to bear and bail out Air India is used in social and health infrastructure. And you make concessions and get a strategic investor on board. So far, that's the government's thinking. I don't think that has changed. And I'm very happy that has not changed.
Right. And very lastly, Kapil, my last question to you is, do you think it would be a good idea for the government to bundle up a Air India and a Jet Airways? Or do you think liquidation is the only, only route that they will have to follow from here on?
So Air India and Jet difficult because Jet is a $4 billion liability. It may increase. It's been over a year, more than a year, that the Jet has closed. 12 aircraft, more or less slots gone. It's an impossible task under post-COVID to revive Jet. There is an investor interest, but I don't think that investor interest is feasible. So liquidation is logical, frankly, for Jet.
Right. All right, Kapil. Pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for being a part of the show as well. We will come back to you as well once things improve to actually understand how how they've resurfaced from here on and whether they are out of the air pocket as well or not. But thank you so much for joining in. And I wouldn't say stay home, but stay safe at least.
Pleasure.
Thank you.